from the studios of Farm Journal Broadcast.
Today on Ag Day, volunteers stepping up to help drought-plagued ranchers. In agribusiness, why a new Japanese tariff on U.S. beef may not be a big deal.
But the point to be made is we've largely offset this in just currency values.
See how the shape of a cotton bale could make or break a cotton gin. Which grain haulers are making the grade? From the packer, potato problems at the border.
Ag Day, presented by the Chevy Silverado. High-strength steel for high-strength dependability.
Good morning, I'm Tricia Sloma. Clinton Griffiths is on assignment. As drought continues to dramatically reduce pasture land and crops in the northern tier states, a lottery to get badly needed hay to ranchers is now reaching even farther. A hay lottery organized by the North Dakota Department of Ag and North Dakota State University has now been expanded to drought-affected producers in neighboring South Dakota and Montana. Much of the donated hay is coming from a farm-led coalition in Michigan called Ag Community Relief. The same group helped with hay donations for the wildfires in the southern plains. With each passing week without significant rain, the losses are quickly mounting.
I imagine you're going to see impacts that are going to be well into the hundreds of millions of dollars in terms of lost revenue for the state and for our farmers and ranchers out there, plus the additional expenses of purchasing feedstuffs and supplements and that sort of thing that they normally wouldn't purchase.
Livestock producers interested in applying for the hay lottery must fill out an application through the North Dakota Ag Department website. Those producers must be located in an area designated as D2, D3, or D4 to qualify. There are also herd size requirements. Each state will conduct its own drawing. Looking at USDA's crop report, 68% of Montana range and pasture land is now rated poor to very poor. That's an 8-point decline from last week. North Dakota is unchanged with 78% in those poor conditions. South Dakota saw a slight improvement, but 67% is still in the low range. As we reported yesterday, cotton harvest is now underway in South Texas. The Ag Department says just 1% has been picked. Bolls are opening on 12% of the Texas crop, which is close to the 5-year average. 45% of the crop is rated good to excellent. Cotton is seeing a big comeback this year due to better prices, but the recovery is too late for some ginners. During the recent down years, cotton gins throughout the South closed up. But for the gins who invested in the technology to accept round modules, recovery has been a smoother transition. Ken Moore from the Arkansas Farm Bureau has details.
The expansion and reopening of cotton gins may be signs of a cotton revival in Arkansas. Following a decade of declining acreage, some of the state's larger gins are expanding their capacity to handle the demand, including McGee Producers Gin in Deshay County.
We're expecting somewhere, 110,000 bales, maybe 120 if we have a good crop. We're putting, a new press in to handle a new gin stand, new lint cleaners, new pre-cleaning, a new press to handle that. We're having to redo all our seed lines and all that to handle the increased volume.
As smaller gins across southeast Arkansas have shut down, the McGee gin has picked up that business.
Whenever the cotton acres started falling and gins started to shut down and had low volume, we were able to, with the round bales, we were able to go twice as far than what we were going. So we were able to keep our capacity, at a pretty good. It wasn't great. I think our worst year was like 40,000 bales. Last year we were up to 87,000 bales, and this year we're going to go up, like I said, to over 100,000.
Beginning in 2006, cotton acres began to decline, and correspondingly, the number of active gins. In 2006, 1.2 million acres were planted, with 62 gins in operation. By 2010, acreage dropped to 550,000, with 50 gins in operation. In 2015, there were only 210,000 acres of cotton and 26 gins. That changed in 2016 as cotton prices improved relative to soybeans and corn, and acreage increased to 380,000. University of Arkansas cotton agronomist Bill Robertson thinks that's because of round bale module technology.
Having the ability to haul 8 of those round modules on a flatbed semi really gives gins the opportunity to efficiently spread out their ginning radius. And so our big gins, I think, are getting bigger, and because there's the technologies there for them to be able to do that. And so it's just going to be, the potential is wide open.
This is Ken Moore reporting.
Whitaker says his gin handled about 1,000 bales a day, but they hope to increase that number to 1,300 this year. With harvest starting in the south, elevators are hoping they have enough rail cars to move the grain in a timely fashion. That said, the Soy Transportation Coalition just released its annual report card of the major rail companies. Agricultural shippers rated the performance of the 7 Class 1 freight haulers on a list of topics, including on-time performance, customer service, and cost. The coalition survey puts Union Pacific at the head of the class for the 5th time. Norfolk Southern had the biggest improvement, up 15% in its grades. Canadian Pacific was the lowest performer. The survey period runs from September to March, when a high percentage of U.S. soybeans and other grains are moved. Well, we have an update this morning on a contract vote by the dock workers along the Pacific coast. That's important because that's where most U.S. ag exports to Asian markets are shipped out. A majority of members of the International Longshore and Warehouse Union has voted in favor of a 3-year contract extension. 67% of the union supported the deal with the Pacific Maritime Association, which represents port operators. The extension will take the contract to July of 2022. You may remember a labor dispute in the late 2014 brought the ports in California, Oregon, and Washington almost to a complete halt. Let's get a look at farm country weather on this Wednesday morning. Mike Hoffman has the details from the AgDay Weather Center. Good morning, Mike.
Good morning, Tricia. We begin in Covington County, Alabama. A NASS crop reporter says corn is getting ready to harvest when they get a few dry days. Hay cutting has been sporadic and only when there has been a dry spell. Now to Maine, the state NASS office says fruit harvest is in full swing for peaches, blueberries, and raspberries. Fruit producers reported seeing an increase in many diseases, though, in crops because of the humid, rainy conditions. The state's potato crop is 70% good and 30% excellent. Now taking a look at the root zone moisture, we're going to take a closer look at this coming up, but there are a few places that we have to be concerned about. We'll talk more about that in a few minutes, but first, here are some hometown temps.
This is Machinery Pete, inviting you to check out my new website, machinerypete.com. Offering farmers tens of thousands of used equipment listings to search, let Machinery Pete help you find and value your next piece of used equipment.
Still to come, many in the U.S. beef industry are not happy with Japan's decision to boost tariffs on U.S. frozen beef. But will it really have an impact on U.S. production? We'll discuss next in Agribusiness. From the Packer, we'll look at a new challenge for U.S. potato growers as one export market puts the brakes on shipments. In Agribusiness today, it's a mixed day on the grain boards. Let's get a look at Tuesday's close from the CME in Chicago.
Corn market was mixed on Tuesday. We traded both sides of unchanged. We bounced from some lows last week. The December corn futures traded right down to those lows from June in the mid 370s and have bounced since. So we've seen a little bit of a recovery here during the last few days. I think the old crop situation in corn remains burdensome, and I think it continues to cap the market in some respects. There's certainly going to be more old crop corn than ever this year. USDA is projecting a record carryout on August 31st following this old crop marketing year. So that's one of the factors that I think has kept this market from rallying in the way that we've seen the last couple of years. The live cattle market rebounded on Tuesday after a major sell-off on Monday. As a matter of fact, on Monday, both the live cattle and the feeder cattle futures traded limit down at one point in time. So we're seeing a little bit of a recovery here on Tuesday. The market's traded both sides of unchanged. But in general here, the cash market, the box beef market, and the futures market all under pressure here during the last several trading days. Again, Joe Vaclik from CME Group here in Chicago.
The U.S. Meat Export Federation says Japan continues its strong buying of U.S. beef. Exports to the country continue to gain momentum in June, with volume up 7% and value up 13% compared to a year ago. USMEF says while demand for U.S. beef is very strong in Japan's retail and food service sectors, frozen exports to Japan face a higher tariff rate through March of 2018. And as we've been reporting, the tariff on U.S. frozen beef has risen from 38.5% to 50%. But one analyst we talked to doesn't think the tariff will have much of an impact. Here's Tyne Morgan.
Here now with Don Close of Rabobank. Don, when we look at Japan, as of August 1st, we increased tariffs. They increased tariffs on U.S. frozen product from 38.5% to 50%. What was the reasoning behind that?
The reasoning with that is that the quotas are set at a 17% increase, year-over-year increase. The volume was 17.1%. So it just barely tripped the trigger on the TRQ. One of the negotiation points in the Trans-Pacific Partnership was, instead of evaluating those trade flows on a quarterly basis, to monitor those trade flows on an annualized basis. If we would have been a part of the TPP, this wouldn't have been a factor.
Yeah, because we only went over by how much?
17.1%.
I mean, you think that they would have some wiggle room, but you think this is all sending the message from TPP?
I think it's sending a very crystal clear message on TPP. There was also a wire service story out earlier today that Japan has sent signals that, well, they would possibly be willing to discuss this issue, reevaluate the TRQ and the increased tariffs later this fall. So it could be that we start to see some negotiations from them before we go the full 9 months of their fiscal year.
So we could renegotiate this, but at the end of the day, right now, jumping from 38.5% to 50% on frozen product, how big of an impact does that have for our exports?
I know the U.S. industry is upset about it, and rightfully so, and it's terribly frustrating. At the same time, since the big move in currencies in early July, if you take the surge in values in the Australian dollar, the slight increase in the Japanese yen, and the weakness in the U.S. dollar, if you take what it costs Japan to buy product from Australia in U.S. dollars, and what it costs them to buy product on U.S. product with U.S. dollars, it's almost a direct offset to the 11.5%. Now, a lot of that product is priced on an annualized basis. It's priced on a semi-annual basis, so it's difficult for them to capitalize on a short-term currency play. But the point to be made is we've largely offset this in just currency values.
All right, thanks for keeping it in perspective, Don. We appreciate that. Stay with us. We'll be back with more Ag Day in just a moment.
Rabo AgriFinance is a leading provider of agricultural finance services. Their exclusive research gives clients a competitive advantage. Visit www.raboag.com.
Are you a game changer? Know someone who is? Chevron is searching for those people that have made an impact on the industry. Share your nominee at chevrondello.com/gamechangers. Dello, let's go further.
And welcome back to Ag Day. Here's the latest root zone moisture. In the first part, we did show you kind of last week's, and you'll notice that it's turned wetter from eastern Texas into parts of the Missouri Valley on up toward Kansas City, although mainly south of there. And for the first time in a while, there's actually some wet areas in North Dakota and parts of South Dakota, still wet from the Great Lakes down into parts of the Gulf Coast. But the concerning areas are in that tri-state region of Iowa, Missouri, and Illinois, northern Minnesota now, and the eastern Carolinas and eastern Virginia. Those appear to be the main concerns as far as dry conditions on the root zone moisture. So here's the weather map, stationary front through the Carolinas, so hopefully you folks get some of that rain, and scattered thunderstorms will develop along this front. Also along a slow-moving system moving through the upper portions of the Midwest with an attending cold front, which will just kind of reinforce the cooler air that right now is over the eastern 2/3 of the country, at least north of the stationary front. South of there, you're still pretty muggy. You can see as we head through the nighttime hours tonight, showers and storms continue to move eastward into the western Great Lakes. Some scattered stuff down into the central plains and along that stationary front. And through the afternoon hours tomorrow, things will bubble up once again, especially near and south of this front down in the southeastern and southern Mississippi Valley areas, and along that system moving through the western Great Lakes into the central plains with that cool front. Out west, you're really just in a holding pattern here. Basically, big high pressure in the upper atmosphere continues to dominate, so you can only get those afternoon variety showers and storms. There's a precipitation estimate over the past 24 hours. Most of it has been from the Carolinas through the southern portions of the country and the Gulf Coast states. Adding in the next 36, we're going to continue to add more in those areas, and we'll see a little bit more across the upper Midwest, western Great Lakes, and the central plains as those scattered thunderstorms kind of develop with that secondary system. High temperatures this afternoon, lots of 70s, northern plains, Great Lakes, northeast, lots of 80s south of there, a few 90s farther south. The hot area continues to be in the southwest. At least the west coast isn't nearly as hot as you were a week ago at this time. You can see low temperatures tonight going to drop off into the 60s across most of the Corn Belt, which is very pleasant for this time of the year. 70s in the southeast, and you can see the jet stream as we head through time. We're going to see this trough just kind of continue in the eastern portions of Canada. Little pieces of energy continue to rotate into the Great Lakes and the northeast. We may see a little heat later next week, coming farther eastward than it has this week anyway. That's a look across the country. Now let's take a look at some local forecasts. First of all, for Billings, Montana, partly sunny, rather warm today, high of 81 degrees. Glen Ellen, Illinois, partly sunny and very nice, high of 83. And finally, Tifton, Georgia, warm and humid, a couple of showers and storms likely, high 88.
Still to come, celebrating the arrival of a total solar eclipse. We'll show you what some people have in mind. But first, how is the 2017 apple crop shaping up this year in Washington? We'll have the state's first production estimate for the year. In news from our partners at the Packer, a federal judge in Mexico has ordered the Mexican Department of Agriculture to stop the import of fresh U.S. potatoes. The judge listed concerns about pests as one of the reasons, but some groups on this side of the border says it's politics. The National Potato Council is waiting for details on the decision. Prior to this ruling, U.S. fresh potatoes were only allowed within a 26-kilometer zone to protect Mexican production. But there's no such limit on frozen potatoes. According to the Packer, the potato issue has previously been linked to avocados. While technically still open, shipments from one state in Mexico were halted at the Texas border. U.S. health officials say more people have contracted salmonella by eating papayas from a farm in southern Mexico. The Centers for Disease Control says 109 people in 16 states have caught the illness from eating papayas shipped to this country. Nearly half of the cases have been in New York and New Jersey, but there have also been individual cases reported in the Midwest. Also from the Packer, the nation's top apple growing state is expecting a big crop this year as harvest gets underway, but the Washington crop is a bit smaller than last year. The Washington State Tree Fruit Association released its first forecast of the 2017 fresh apple crop. It expects nearly 131 million 40-pound boxes. That's down about 1% from last year. Red Delicious will account for 24% of total fresh production. Washington apple harvest typically begins in August and runs into November. Still to come, getting ready for the big solar show, and we have something for your eclipse menu.
In the country, brought to you by Kubota. Learn more about Kubota SSV Series skid steers at Kubota.com or demo one at your local Kubota dealer today.
Are you getting caught up in eclipse mania? Many people are, and they'll be celebrating the celestial phenomenon in many different ways. On August 21st, there will be a total solar eclipse crossing from coast to coast in the U.S. A solar eclipse is when the moon passes between the sun and the earth and blocks the sun. A thin path across the U.S. will be treated to the first coast-to-coast total eclipse in nearly a century. And people will celebrate in different ways. For instance, the Wyoming Beef Council is taking advantage of the hoopla. They think folks need to celebrate with a great American Eclipse burger. Sure, they may look like normal condiments, but the Beef Council says use a toothpick to draw from the center of the bun outward to mingle the sauces and create a ring of fire around the beef patty. A simple solar celebration. And that's all the time we have this morning. We're so glad you tuned in. For Tyne Morgan and Mike Hoffman, I'm Tricia Sloma. Have a great day.
AgDay is powered by Ram Trucks, America's longest-lasting pickups.